All right, welcome everybody. I'm very happy today on Living Stronger Longer podcast, Living Your Best Life After Age 40, to have an old friend of mine, Andrew Shortt. I'm looking at us both on the screen here. And when we first met, neither of us had this much gray hair. So here we are. I've known Andrew at least since the
I grade early.
Yeah, early 2000s. Maybe sooner. I remember, of course, seeing his picture on the IART website, International Association of Resistance Trainers, long before I met him. At one point, he and I competed in a bodybuilding competition. He continued to do so after I did. He is certified with the International Association of Resistance Trainers. He may have other certifications as well that he'll tell us about. As a fitness clinician, he has co-authored books with Brian Johnston on zone training or J-reps, and he'll probably dive into some of that as we talk more. And he's also been awarded 3 separate times Fitness Clinician of the Year, which means of all the trainers with the IART, he was voted of doing the best job. He's also, I know he likes to play guitar. I know he likes music. And he's also competed in endurance events and things like that, which I think he does more or less just for fun.
That's right.
Because he can. And I'm really, I've had some good conversations with Andrew over the years. He has opinions, and that's good. And his opinions, though, come from a lot of experience, a lot of reading and whatnot. So, Andrew, what have I missed as far as an intro? What else should folks know about you that I've overlooked?
Nothing other than, my foundation is now a strength studio. My wife and I opened up a strength studio in Canada's nation's capital in Little Italy back in 2015. So we were fitness clinicians for many years before that, but then we decided to open up, branch out, and do our own thing. So that's what we've done since 2015. Just her and I. We've stayed away from employees thus far, but that's what we enjoy. So we're basically open there 6 a.m. till 3 in the afternoon, 5 days a week, and then for maybe a half day on Saturdays. So that's when I still spend the majority of my time training people.
Okay, yeah, and I've left out probably the most important, biggest chunk is that you are operating a successful studio that I've been to. I've been trained by Andrew, and does a great job.
We fit.ca.
Right, exactly. So before we started recording, you talked about a few different things, and I know one of the things that we chatted about was that most of our clients have different goals than maybe some people who are in their 20s and whatnot have in terms of improving their quality of life in general. And also the idea of a exercise modality that you feel has been overlooked in terms of being able to continue with your exercise program for decades and truly for life. So what does your clientele look like, and how does that fit into your recent thoughts about sustainability when it comes to exercise programs?
Well, I think as I've aged and thought about exercise from an aging standpoint, I mean, I always thought of it from a very sporting standpoint, like you and I had got into a bodybuilding contest, but we were always sort of late to the game. Like we were looking at it more like, geez, can I even do a bodybuilding contest as an older person, a person who's not in their 20s and 30s, which is what you typically see in most sports. So as I've even gotten older, 2 things, when you run a studio, you're always thinking, who should I advertise to, and who are my best clients when you think of it from a business standpoint. And they were always people over 40, people looking to just have someone else take care of it. And it just is sort of like a weekly appointment. And, they may have had a lot of interest in exercise when they first started training with me in the first year or two, but eventually it just became sort of an appointment and a regular part of their life. But being on what I was saying to you earlier, that just sort of stood out to me lately, is being on the inside, like always being someone who's like, yeah, I got a studio, I'm writing books on exercise, I'm doing bodybuilding contests, I'm running ultra marathons, I'm in it, I'm on the inside of it. You totally miss that 99.99% of the public doesn't think like us, and doesn't there's a lot of very fundamental things that we take for granted, one of which is, if you're not exercising 20 years after you started, you know, if you stop exercising 2 months or 2 years after you started, and then you go 3 or 4 years without exercising, and then you start up another program and you're pretty good about it for a while, and then you get away from it and you come back, you're not really ever experiencing what exercise is about. And exercise, you know, is about improving the quality of your health, and of course, then the quality of your life, by sustaining it over the long term. So if you've been exercising for 10 years regularly, then the rest of your life has been easier. And I would see it in my own clients, but because they came in not knowing me, and then they got to know me and it became a regular part of their life, they never mentioned it afterwards. So it never jumped to the front of my mind that the whole fitness industry, regardless of where you come from and what you're into in the fitness and exercise industry, and including the nutrition industry, they never talk about sustainability. They never talk about the fact that really the importance of a fitness lifestyle, you know, getting your sleep, eating reasonably well, sticking to an exercise program, that matters over the long run. It's not about making changes now.
There's a
right?
lot of
It's all about the long run.
There's a lot of talk about getting in shape, but not a lot about staying in shape. Or, you know, it's like you said about nutrition. People say, how do I lose weight? And I'll say, what's more relevant is, how do you form habits you can maintain for a lifetime? Because if you lose weight and then keep paying it back.
I've analyzed it, because I always like to think about, how did I miss something so obvious? And I think it's because most of the fitness industry is based on the fitness lifestyle. So it's a person who's always thinking about how they eat, and they're going to the gym regularly, or they're working out at home regularly. They have a home gym, that maybe their partner is into it just as much as them, or it's like a hobby that they love. So they tend to be in it all the time, and they don't think about the sustainability. But the average individual doesn't live that way, so they don't do it at all, because the fitness industry has never created anything to bridge that gap. And it's probably because it's boring. Like, I hate to say it, at the end of the day, it's probably because getting in shape is an interesting subject. Oh, well, you try this and do this and blah, 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 blah. And now the next thing you know, you're strong and you look better and you feel better and blah, blah, blah. And people are complimenting you in your life. But staying in shape, it's not, what are you talking about? There's not a lot of subject to talk about there.
Do you think something that might have to do with that? I mean, traditionally, especially big box gyms, they're concerned with signing you up. They don't really, you know, maybe they do in one sense, but from a financial standpoint, if you sign up and you never go to the gym, that's actually better for them. Because if everybody signs up, sticks with it and keeps going, they won't be able to have any new members, right? So it almost rewards them to get people to sign up who don't stick with it.
Yeah, and that's probably a byproduct of figuring out what works in business. Again, like, most businesses don't plan for 20 years down the road. Even though 20 years goes very fast, when you're creating a brand. And, you know, it's the first 5-10 years you're building the brand. It's the second 10 years that makes a difference whether your business is going to be successful or even matter down the road. So I think what happens is the people in the exercise industry that created gyms, they were responding very short term to having to pay bills. And what most people don't stick to an exercise program if they're doing it by themselves. So they just started to cater towards how the public already was. So instead of helping the public, most of the fitness industry caters to the public.
Right.
So instead of trying to find a way to help them stick with it and stay in shape, they're catering towards, well, people are going to join and leave anyway. So our whole model has to be based on getting people in the door, you know? So, I mean, it makes sense from a business standpoint. Like you aren't going to get rich getting 10 clients every 6 months. Like you can't run a gym unless you have a lot of people coming in. Yeah. You have to get those people in.
So it may be, interestingly, that those of us who practice a mode of training that is a lower frequency, lower volume, with all the various debates over the years about which is most effective, that this may turn out to be the most sustainable, maybe its single most, biggest value that it brings to the table. I read a stat, and I don't remember where, and I can't vouch for the stat is accurate, but the stat suggested only 15% of the population exercise regularly. And I don't know if that was the case or not, but I speculate that of that 15%, there's the fairly large percentage of those people who happen to have started last month and are going to be quitting next month. And if you were going to say how many people actually exercise regularly over years, I would suspect the number is even much smaller than that. And most of them, as has been suggested by Jeff Casebolt, may actually have an unhealthy relationship with exercise. You said, even though you do this for a living, your life is multifaceted. You have other interests. And a lot of the people who do it for years, they're like, whatever label you want to put, gym rats or whatever it is. I mean, exercise is their thing. You know what I mean? And they often don't have many other things, because they're doing that. And most people simply don't want to do that on an ongoing basis. They have other interests and competing responsibilities.
This was why I was sort of excited when I heard that you were doing a podcast, because I think there is a sexy element about staying in shape that hasn't been addressed, because it takes the right person to address it. So I'm the guy at the party that is going to start the argument. And then I'm the bad guy, but it gets a really good debate going, and you get 3 people debating with 3 other people about a subject. And I find out about something by causing some controversy. So I'm not the guy that's going to be the cool, level-headed interviewer of different people, right? I'm going to end up arguing with all my guests that I have on the show. But when I heard you were doing it, I remember us after a bodybuilding show, you had arranged a high intensity round table, and remember Bill Simone came in via, and Doug McGuff, they came in via computer. So you were sort of ahead of your time. And now we're in that day and age where it's a lot more convenient to do this kind of thing. And I thought, Richard is the guy who can moderate these kind of discussions and make it sexy again. Like, as funny as it sounds, you're older than I am. In fact, when we went to the bodybuilding contest, you were closer to the age that I am now. I thought I was old at the time for a bodybuilding contest. I was doing it for my 40th birthday. So you're definitely sort of way ahead of the game as far as showing what exercise can do if you stick at it over the long term. Like as far as I can see, it's been a real life changer for you. That's something that you may have never really even have thought when you were younger would have been an interest to you, has sort of improved the quality of your life across the board, to the point now where you run your own facility. Just, you know, that's not something you see a lot of people do later on in life. Usually by the time they're your age, they're like, I need other trainers to work. I don't want to train people all the time, because you've been doing it for so long. You've been in the game for so long. But by sexy, what I mean is the reason why I think most people can't sustain exercise, and this is a physiological thing, and you have a lot of clients, so you've probably seen this. Most people are not energetic people. The people that go to the gym all the time and make exercise, that small percentage of people like my wife who exercise is just a part of their life, it's because they're full of beans. You know, I don't know whether it's they have a different kind of thyroid activity, or I'm being not being a doctor. I won't even speculate what the physiological reason is. But just like there are tall people and short people,
Right,
and people with different colored eyes, there's a small percentage of people who are just full of beans. And so they exercise all the time just because they've got energy to burn. But the majority of the population, if they exercise 3 times in a week, and it's quality exercise, they're not just, wasting time hanging out at a gym for something to do. If they really exercise 3 times a week, they're going to be tired. Like, unless they have a desk job. And, you know, I thought of this because in long distance running, I could never get even close to a lot of other people who, some were even older than I am, but they had desk jobs. And because they had desk jobs, their only physical drain of the week was training for these races. And I thought it's the same with exercise. Like if you go to the gym and you're an average individual and you try to train 3-4 days a week, you're going to be tired. You may go through a period where you have the extra time to do it, but you're going to be physically tired, and it's going to cut into the rest of your life. Because the methodology you and I and high intensity people, or whatever you want to call them, thinking exercisers, people who like to put as much thought into exercise as they do physicality, we have a solution. Right. I mean, it requires definitely you tweak some things about exercise. You can't just go in and play with some dumbbells and a couple of ropes and jump up and down on a box and have fun like you would have when you were in grade school in phys ed class. That's not going to cut it. But we do have a solution to the sustainability thing. We've compacted the workouts. We've taken just the essentials, compacted the workouts. And not only that, we've made it so that you're not going to get injured over time, which is, you know, that's one of the number one things I hear from people. I used to exercise all the time. And I say, what happened? Did you just run out of time? And they say, yeah, I got busy, but also I got hurt. So between being busy and being hurt, you know, they didn't want to stick to it. So I think that's for you, Richard, to make sexy again, is to disseminate the idea that we've got a solution.
Yeah, it's interesting.
We can talk about the solution, but it's boring to people who don't care about exercise. But someone who wants to be in shape and they're looking for answers, we actually have a solution. Like, it really exists.
It's interesting you talked about, you know, Tierney being full of beans. I remember somebody saying, asking a question. I think it might have been Doug McGuff, but I'm not sure. And the question at first seems ludicrous. And the question was, are people fit because they exercise, or do people exercise because they're fit? And sort of the idea that some people are just naturally predisposed, higher energy, full of beans, however you want to put it, higher energy people who tend to gravitate towards that. But many people, I don't think that's their natural inclination. And I think, you know, it's interesting, and I thank you, you said a lot of kind words to me. But one of the things, you know, sometimes a client will ask me, why are we doing this? Why did you change the order of this day? Or why did we do this? And I'll say, truth is, probably doesn't make much difference one way or the other. I says, the only big difference is whether you exercise or you don't. That's going to be your first biggest change. And that you stick to it long term. I says, but that's an oversimplification, because you only stick to it long term if A, the time commitment is one you can live with, and B, you don't hurt yourself. So, while I agree with the statement that the best exercise program is the one you actually do, then I do think there's a lot of fine print underneath that, which is that most people will not do the majority of exercise. And if they can, then more power to them, whatever it happens to be, as long as A, they're sticking with it, and B, they're not getting hurt. And I guess I might add a third thing that's just coming to my mind now, is that it doesn't imbalance your life, because I really do think people should have other interests. Well, first of all, they have their families. If they're not retired, they have their careers. But then they should have other hobbies and other things that they take place. If exercise starts to take over, because you've probably seen, especially if you've been in endurance activities, some people, and you and I hope you don't mind me saying this, I can cut it out later, know a little bit about addiction. And I think there's a lot of people out there who are bona fide exercise addicts, right? Where they've ruined their knees, they've had a couple of knee replacements, and they're still doing the things that ruined their knees in the first place. To me, that is a bona fide addiction.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
Well, it is bizarre, as addiction in general is bizarre, right? Why do people continue to do self-destructive activities when it's obvious to themselves, if they're honest at all, and everybody around them, that it's making their lives worse? And then but you continue. That's the nature of addiction, right? But I do think that, and that's why Jeff Casebolt, the guy from Dynavec, when he said, one of the statements that he made is that of 6% of people who lift weights in the States, that was the stat he gave me, at least half of them have an unhealthy relationship with the weight room. And he didn't elaborate on what he meant by that, but I expect it as either being obsessive compulsive behavior or even, drug use and things like that. Oh, your volume is off. You may have muted yourself by there.
I was just jumping in to say it's funny, because I used to hate talking about diet. Like my wife has got a lot of certifications in diet and this sort of thing. And I used to always hate talking about diet. And I didn't really, I figured I just didn't have interest in the subject, but I would always find myself learning something new about nutrition. So over time, I thought, why am I so grumpy when it comes to the idea of nutrition, like extra grumpy? And it's because of what I'm saying about exercise. In the back of my head, I couldn't understand why people dealt with nutrition the way they did, just like exercise. Like everything was short term. Like, who cares what you can do for 3 months? Who even cares what you can do for a year or two? Like, unless I'm your family member or something, or I live with you, it's kind of interesting to go through the journey of a person trying a different diet. Say, I'm going to go keto, and they do keto for a year, and you see all this interesting stuff about how to make it work, how it affects your lifestyle. Does it seem any different than another diet? But if you can't sustain it, it's like, I'm interested in things that I'm still interested in since I was a kid. Like, interest to me means that you're into it over a long period of time. And there's a lot of knowledge and wisdom built up over time and a lot of experience. So if you look at the nutrition field, it's exactly like fitness. They're just, I don't know if it's business or it's just people, but there's nothing out there discussing longevity. Like, try to find a nutrition book about longevity. You know, I used to laugh saying to my clients, you know, clients say, God, you know, I still got weight to lose. Like, can't you help me with that? Can't you talk? You know, they bring up food once a year when the weather got nice and they weren't covered with clothes. And I'd say, well,
do you mean longevity or long-term adherence?
yeah, but longevity in the sense of whatever you did that worked, how do you still do that a long while later? So longevity of the program.
Right.
Mouthy chihuahua. He doesn't like nutrition either. You know, so I would always make jokes and say, well, if you had just lost a pound a month since you met me, all that weight would be gone. Do you think it would be hard to lose a pound a month? Do you think it would be hard to just eat a little bit less so that you see your weight coming down by about a pound every month? And they just look at me blank. And I'd laugh and we'd chuckle and it would just get chalked up to my personality. But I kept coming back to it and thinking, why am I getting a blank look? Like, this is rudimentary. Like, I'm making a really obvious point. What you're talking about getting your weight down by eating different, you don't care about it. Like, right. Don't waste my time with this conversation. If you cared about it, the weight would be gone. I've known you for a year or two. Like, if you just lost a pound, you know, so you see, my attitude was not from the point of view of just the regular everyday person. The regular everyday person didn't argue with me and say that's not true. They just looked at me blankly like, I've never thought of that before. But I wasn't getting a light bulb to go on over their heads either.
Right.
You know, right. I wasn't a teacher. I wasn't creating an aha moment where they go, oh my God, that's true. Like, what you're saying holds a lot of truth. If you want to be in shape, you have to do things that have longevity, that are, your word, sustainable, that you use, sustainable strength. That's a much more accessible word. I think it analyzes. You're saying, by saying sustainable strength, you're saying let's look at what's unsustainable. Let's consider that they're understand.
And I think the stats around nutrition and diet are even far worse than those around exercise.
Yeah.
And I you know, Doug McGuff used to often say things that I believe but can't prove. And I got a little bit of a cruder one. I call it things that I reserve the right to be full of shit on. Because there's just things that but if you look at the stats of people who lose weight and keep it off long term, it's really depressing.
Yeah.
And yet it's because it doesn't take big changes. It takes small changes, to your point, small changes that are maintained indefinitely. Long term. Like I did the math one time, is if, let's say, you're about in your early 60s and you've gained 50 pounds since you were in high school, you know how many extra calories a day that is over 50 years? 15 calories. That's like a breath mint. It's not even a breath mint, right? So it's kind of
that's incredible, really.
Yeah, but now if you're there now and you've got 50 pounds to lose and you want to try to lose it in 3 months or 6 months, you're almost right off the bat setting yourself up. And people don't want to hear that. Like I say, you got 50 pounds to lose, at least a year. And if you want to maintain it, it's probably better off to think about 2 or 3 years. Now, of course, if somebody is morbidly obese where it's currently creating threats to their current health and they're at an age where they simply don't have the time, then they have to become a little more drastic. But at that point in time, they're in a serious situation. Because to me, the reserving the right to be full of shit on this is, I think that a prerequisite to long-term success is to lose it slow, to make small adjustments. I mean, there's certain things you can do, like avoiding, industrial seed oils and processed foods and things like that. And I think for a lot of people, they're better off to start out with not, I'm going to lose weight. I'm just going to try to make better choices. I'm not going to worry about how much I'm eating. I'm going to worry about what I'm eating. And even if you haven't got a degree in nutrition and whatnot, most people can tell that having a bagel with cream cheese is not a good, or a muffin with your coffee is not as good a choice as having bacon and eggs in the morning or something like that. Most people can pretty much tell what a good choice is. Given between two options, most people, they won't be optimal maybe, but they'll be able to make vast improvements in their food choices, even with very limited knowledge. And I think
they have to be able to remember what they ate last week in regards to that choice, right? Like there's this illusion that if I lost the weight, okay, I slowly put it back on, but I lost it, so I can lose it again.
Right. Well,
so the message of the sustainability doesn't get across because people aren't thinking, no, but you needed to not put it back on. That's hurting you. That's stressing out your body as you're putting this weight back on.
I actually, again, suspect, reserving that same right that I alluded to before, that people are likely better to just stay overweight over a long period of time than to lose it and gain it, lose it, gain it, lose it, gain it. I don't know that, but it wouldn't surprise me that that's hard on people to lose it and gain it. You might as well just stay bigger and stay there and get stronger type of thing. But again, like, my father, who is a recovering alcoholic, used to say, quitting's easy. It's not starting over that's the hard part. And part of it, I think, is, to me, abstinence is easier than moderation. Because if you think about it, if you're an extreme personality, abstinence is extreme. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
It's easier to quit drinking than it is to moderate your drinking. So, but with diet, that's not an option. And with nutrition too, every now and then you want to have, it's going to be your daughter's wedding day. You're going to have a piece of wedding cake. You know what I mean? It's Christmas time and you're going to be at a big family dinner and somebody spent hours preparing a special meal. You're going to want to indulge that day. And if you're okay, I really like this saying, it's not what you eat between Christmas and New Year's, it's what you eat between New Year's and Christmas. So based on sustainability, if you're good most of the time, and then you treat those things, and I'll use an example from alcohol. Like a liqueur. Let's say you and I are both non-drinkers, but if you were a drinker, you would know that a liqueur is something that's a special treat, which you have a little bit once in a while and you sip it. So you think of those foods that are maybe not as healthy and whatnot, is you don't have to give them up altogether, but they're a special treat. They're to be treated with respect, knowing that there's an addictive part to that and they're not the best thing for you. So you want to consume them in moderation.
Yep. And a few clients, you must have a few clients who've always been able to just naturally maintain a reasonable body fat. And I find when you quiz them, they tend to be that personality sort of naturally, where they are a moderate personality. Right. They like to moderate their lifestyle. So they're the opposite. They're not the people who go to extremes on anything. They just tend to be moderates.
Right.
I mean, some of it is body type for sure. There's a genetic component. But when you match a moderate personality with nutrition, you tend to get that effect that you're talking about, which is weird when you consider how much info there is about nutrition, and people don't just copy people who've kept the weight off. Like that, you know, like I would think if you wanted to do a podcast on nutrition, you would interview a bunch of people who just naturally seem to keep it off. At least you'd have them as a guest once a month, and you'd ask regular folk how they do it, right? Like what is it about their lifestyle that's different than the majority of the public?
So do you provide nutritional counseling to your clients other than conversations as you're training them or things like that? Do you have it as a product?
Never formally. I've refused to go that route. I mean, I told my wife if she wanted to do that as a thing, it would have to be a separate business, because again, I'm trying to make it possible for someone who's got to remember, okay, I have to exercise with Andrew on this day at this time. I got to make sure I'm clear for the amount of time that that's going to take to get there. And I'm trying to make it easy for them to sustain the exercise over the long haul, so that they can stay with me as a client forever and ever, and they stay in shape, and it's good. Like I have a significant effect on their life. If you mix in the nutrition, at least if you mixed it in their exercise, you know, in the whole package, when they weren't eating well or when they put weight back on, it would make them feel uncomfortable coming and seeing me. Now, that's actually good for some people. There are some personalities that love the accountability, but the majority of the public, it's just going to make them feel uncomfortable. It's going to make, there's going to be failure attached to the whole situation. And I always say, you know, you showed up this week to exercise again. You're starting in the right place today. You're staying the course, right? I mean, like you said, unless the person's in trouble right now with obesity, in which case they need medical intervention anyway. Like they should be talking to their doctor about all the blood tests and stress tests required to show them what kind of position they're in, especially if I'm going to train them. If you really have a big weight problem, I have to be concerned about how you're going to respond to the exercise. Like what kind of stress is going to put on your cardiovascular system, your heart, your lungs, and what is it going to do to your joints? Like, how are we going to look at your situation and make it sustainable? Well, if you're really overweight, something needs to be done now. But the majority of the public is somewhere between 10 and 40 pounds overweight. They can just chip away at that.
Yeah, well, but you made some really good points, and I found that to be the case too. Is, you know, when you're just worried about the strength, you can just constantly offer positive reinforcement. Hey, you showed up, way to go, right? Here you are again doing another workout, and hey, guess what? We just lifted a little more weight than we did last time. We did a little extra reps, everything else. You're getting stronger. And it's just continuously positive reinforcement over and over again. When they go with their weight and then they come back and then they may have slipped back and things like that, then unless, you know, people skills really comes into play, quite possibly more than I've got in terms of, you don't want to change this because you don't want to start lecturing people saying, hey, listen, this is important. You could die of a heart attack, things like that. Because then they start to go, I don't want to go see that guy, because when I go see that guy, he's going to make me feel bad about myself. And I don't want to feel bad about myself. And so that's why I sort of, and it's so difficult because when I go see you and I'm in your facility for 30, 40 minutes, however long it takes, you can control everything. As soon as I step out your door, I could be going down the street to, go to the Heart and Crown, or what's the place just down the street from your place?
That's true. Well, Italian restaurants everywhere.
Yeah, so I could be going to have a big bottle of wine and some pasta and a piece of cheesecake for dessert, and you have no control over that. So it's tough to do, unless, that's why you mentioned about Tierney wanting to do it as almost a separate business. And I think if you did it as separate business, I think some of these guys that you hear, Dr. So-and-so, and we have medically supervised weight loss programs and things like that. And I I don't know everything about those programs. I've heard controversial things, but I think if they have some success, part of the success comes from charging people a significant amount of money. Because if I tell you that it's going to cost you $500 a month to be in my weight loss program, then right off the bat, I'm weeding out the people who aren't serious, because they're not coming to see me if they're not serious. And if they're paying the $500, they're much more likely to listen. Because when you give somebody advice, or I give somebody advice, they follow it, they don't follow it, whatever, right? I mean, long term, we know there could be serious consequences. But if you're paying me $500 a month, and I say, here's what I want you to do for the next week. I want you to get a chronometer app and track what you're eating, and I want you to avoid industrial seed oils, and I want you to avoid processed food. You're going to say, all right, I'm paying this guy $500 a month. I better put this into practice. And even though, unless you're going to pay me $500 for a long term, I'm not convinced that that will even create a long-term solution. Or after they stop coming to me and paying the $500 a month, unless they come with me for at least long enough to form habits they can maintain, I think the majority of those people will gain the weight back. I mean, the biggest loser, which of course you and I both know that was complete insanity, what they were making people do. But of course, people were losing weight. Apparently, the stats on the contestants on that show, long term, are absolutely horrible. Virtually none of them have kept that weight off. So,
yeah, they're like people that win the lottery, right? You follow people who win millions and millions of dollars in the lottery, and 10 years later, they're not financially well.
Yeah, Doug McGuff has a video. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It says avoiding white swans. You ever seen that one? Or black swans?
Yes,
black swan
yes.
avoidance. And among other things, such as, don't buy a motorcycle, don't climb on your roof to shovel off snow. One of them is don't buy lottery tickets, because he actually says the stats are incredibly. They're not just have they blown their money and are broke, but often their health is worse. There's been suicide.
They've gotten into trouble.
Yeah, unearned wealth type of thing. So recently, I just want to touch a little bit on Brian Johnston. You mentioned you did a podcast. Were you interviewing him, or he was interviewing you?
Brian so he is involved with a company called, I believe the name of the website is Unguru. So like the opposite of guru, unguru.com. I think the idea is to provide educational material on various subjects from the opposite point of view of a guru. So from the point of view of very realistic viewpoints, using the new format that people can, like you and I can discuss issues where our expertise and our experience lie, and we can do it so easily. It can be easily recorded, and then you can edit it into pieces afterwards. I've noticed sort of everybody's moved that direction. Like, I think if anything good came out of the pandemic, it's this new acceptance and investment in the idea that people can share ideas and experience far easier than we used to be able to do. Usually you could only tackle a small amount of this type of thing, even 10 years ago, especially 15, 20 years ago. Now, because everybody was having to work and reach each other electronically through the internet, a lot has been invested in it. A lot of people have gotten over the hump of learning the basics of how to use something like Zoom and that type of thing, like how it works with the equipment that they have. Like, I use my phone, and, like I hit mute by accident there. The more I do it, the less I'll hit mute. So I think what Brian has seen is he's seen there's this new world for that, and he's very niche, right? So what he's talking about is interviewing someone like you and saying, okay, Richard, because of your experience, your interest, you now have expertise. Let me dig down with you, Richard, about training modalities, right in the weeds. Doesn't necessarily have to be high intensity training, but what equipment do you pick versus what equipment? Maybe it's for the space saving ability, or maybe it's because you've trained a lot of different types of people. So there's invaluable information there, but we don't want to tell people what to do like a guru would. Right. Only do this, only buy this equipment, only exercise like this on these days at this time, and only eat this food. It's the opposite. It's basically just saying, well, what have you discovered along the way? Because like I'm saying about sustainability over the long haul, I'm sure a lot of us know this because we've actually seen it in our work and our daily lives, but we don't realize it's not common knowledge. So that's sort of the unguru information, that there's this wealth of information from people who may just not have put it into words. Well, you interview a Bill DeSimone, you might realize, when I like Bill DeSimone had a book when you had that get together after the bodybuilding, and we were all talking, and Bill had a book that I had read, and I couldn't see why it needed to be written. I couldn't see why the conclusions were of any importance, because it was probably one of his first books. Once I talked to him, I went, oh yeah, I get it. You've taken the time to investigate and research a very specific aspect of keeping training from injuring people regardless of their initial condition. But it doesn't necessarily come across in a book, because a book's trying to tell you what to do the guru way, right? Right. So I think that's what the unguru is. It's sort of like all of us that used to argue different modalities about exercise. When you actually sit down and talk to each other, you realize you're a lot closer on the same page than you thought you were.
Well, I think too, the idea of, I believe that there's a need for humility when it comes to many things to do with science, particularly around the human body, and humility on the part of the so-called gurus or experts, and also from the other people to take the term expert or guru with several grains of salt. I try to frame the things I say as based on my experience and the information that I've been exposed to. This or that is what appears to make the most sense to me right now. Keeping that right, that maybe down the road, as I'm exposed to new experiences and new information, I may realize that what I currently think makes sense is either wrong or incomplete. In most cases, it's not a matter of wrong or right, it's incomplete. You've got a piece of the puzzle, but you haven't got it all. In the last couple of years, there's been this whole thing about trust the experts on, some of the prevailing things.
Follow the science.
Yeah, and all this. And the thing, I heard one guy, and he made a point about how complicated the human body is. And he said, you have a cell phone, and you and I use it, and we know how to use it, but we don't know how it works, right? We don't know how the hell this thing does all these amazing things. He says, well, picture a caveman holding that cell phone. He says, that's about how much we know about the human body right now. So there's so many things that have yet to be discovered and whatnot. And if you look at history, we seem to have repeated this mistake over and over again. Historically, we gather a certain amount of knowledge, and then it becomes dogma. And then it becomes, these are the experts. And then somebody comes up with something that challenges that. and they are ridiculed and they're attacked and they're quacks and all this stuff. And then eventually the idea finally turns out not in all cases, because some people are coming up with nonsense. Finally it comes out, and then all of a sudden there's a bit of a revolution of stuff as these new ideas take over. And then no sooner do you have it that rather than learn from that experience, we go back and that becomes a new dogma. And then all of a sudden now, so as people have more and more, and I think we see that, and you think we'd have learned by now.
Well, I think that's the result of the fact that when you have a new idea, you need to, like with the zone training thing, the big problem with zone training, even though it's not a hard concept to get that, like when you move your muscles, there's different positions that you're in. You don't have to do the full movement. Like if you're gonna exercise your bicep, you don't have to go from a straight arm to a bent arm, and that's it. You could do part of the movement. The whole idea was quite simple, but it had to be packaged, and then as a package, all put together with a start, a middle, and an end, and then put out there. And then someone takes that and goes and they don't quite understand something because it's the terminology is not something they're used to, or it's just a very new idea. But when we have conversations, new ideas just grow. They have that growth period like they do with the individuals who come up with the idea. Like when Arthur Jones and his son Gary were developing machines in the first place, there was probably a whole growth phase, over a year, building stuff from scratch. And there were no machines in gyms. So it was sort of like they couldn't really copy something from the exercise field. So they probably had to copy ideas with pulleys and stuff from other areas and make up some stuff. That whole growth period before they had the final product, if everybody is exposed to that, or more people are exposed to that, then you don't have this, it has to be accepted. Shh, you guys be quiet. He doesn't agree with me. Arthur, that's Arthur. He's actually named after Arthur Jones, my ornery Chihuahua. He doesn't agree with anybody about anything. He's sort of like me. Anyway, my point being, I think now in this day and age, with things like your podcast or what Brian's doing with Unguru, the idea that the newness is laid out over time instead of in one book. Here's your diet, right? Here's your new exercise program. I think that makes it much more natural for people to process. I think we are moving as a society. I don't know if we're moving quick enough for it to be of use in the long run, but I think we are moving as a society to this Unguru kind of approach where we're not having to completely have the speech written, and then Richard introduces me and I read a speech to him about what Andrew believes, right? Because there's a lot gets left out, there's no nuance there.
Yeah, I really hope you're right, because I think one of the things about humility is if I just say, based on the experience I have, the information that I have, that I've seen, this is what makes the most sense to me, but I could be wrong, then you're leaving yourself open to new ideas. Once you start saying, there's certain things, obviously, but once you start saying this is fact, and that's it, especially if you become known as an expert because of the facts that you've disseminated, then you've sort of painted yourself into a corner where when faced with contradictory evidence, you're going to have trouble. You're going to fall prey to confirmation bias, which is anything that doesn't agree with your point of view, you're going to automatically reject before you've even given it any consideration. And there's a saying, I think I got it from Bryce Lee, but he was quoting somebody else. It says, if convincing you is going to cost you your paycheck, I'm very unlikely to convince you. right? And and that means literally money, but you could have other things invested. It could be your reputation. It could be, you know what I mean? If you're known and you're famous for, and you've written a book about, and all of a sudden you're faced with contradictory evidence that basically might mean that a large part of your life's work is not right.
Well, you know, I don't know if you've noticed, and I noticed this. This comes to mind because you had asked about Brian and his podcast. One of the first things they said back to him was, we need these, you can chop these down into a shorter segment because we need it to have time for a Q&A after. See, the technology is starting to allow material to be released live where there could be Q&A.
Right.
So if I go and I present an idea, and I'm sure that you have a lot of experience in this field, you go to a lecture about it, and the lecture is great. It's like a podcast. You get a bunch of ideas that come up, but I like to hear the Q&A with the person who I'm getting the information from, because I know when they're giving me the organized, boxed information about an idea that I don't know about, that might be a fairly new take on something, there's a lot left out there. There's a lot of connections and digestion going on, right, that can't, it would be just too long. You wouldn't be able to remember everything they have to say. But if they cut it down into segments, well, then they're missing so much of how it all connects together. You'd have to take a 3-year course in any one subject, especially if the person has been, you know, working at this field for a very long time. But now there's a Q&A. Now, when you hear someone interviewed that you like, and say, oh, I like the way this person talks about exercise or talks about nutrition, and you hear different people interview them, different personalities ask them questions, different questions, and in different ways. And that's when you start to really understand what's going on. Like, how many of us argued about how you should train clients back in the day, and how personal training should be with high intensity training, and how many people got on Brian about his ideas of how you should train your clients. And no. You know, it's always got to be full body. It's always got to be timed reps in this particular manner. What I noticed over time with more and more video coming out is, if I watch someone train people in a video before I discuss exercise with them, I don't get into nearly as much trouble, because I watch where they stand. I watch what their point of view is. You know, we could have a differing opinion on a piece of equipment just based on where we tend to have it in the room and where we stand when the person does it. You see something different than me. Right. So like, I always force myself when I'm training clients to try to stand in every possible position that I can where that piece of equipment is for each individual, because sometimes, as they're really exerting effort and their body language is very, very real, you know, they're into the effort part of the set where, oh my God, you know, they don't have nearly as much control anymore. If I stand in different positions, farther away, closer on the right instead of the left, or in front, or don't let them really see me, like I notice different things. And I think the same goes for disseminating information. If you get to know the person a little better by seeing them questioned, then their point of view isn't so foreign to you, especially if it's not, especially if it's something that seems, at least in the first 3 layers, to disagree with something. Because there's different ways to skin a cat, right? Like, if you train somebody versus me training them, it's going to be different. Like, you hated the double legger, what the heck's it called? Squat. The duo squat, yeah.
And now I have one.
And now you have
one. I have the duo leg press.
So this is, mine has no seat. So I heard from client after client, oh my God, it's hurting my shoulders. I can't do this. I heard this many, many times. And that could have led me to believe that the machine is not properly designed. That's why they didn't make many of them. They sure didn't sell many of them. So this is the duo squat, as a kind of a Nautilus aside, is a perfect example of what we're talking about here. So this machine, people get in it, and 9 times out of 10, they say they can't do it because there's no seat. So when they push with their legs, they don't absorb some of the force where the seat meets the back, right where their hips are. So it goes all up into their shoulders. They feel squashed, but they're just cheating. And I say to them, no, you're just pushing with your shoulders. People go, are you out of your mind? The machine is pushing me back into the shoulder pads. And I say, no, the machine's not doing anything.
I found that I back up the seat and I put blockers to change the range so that I don't allow that really aggressive negative cam to really come into play. I
never even thought of doing that. That's way too complicated for me. You know what I do?
What's that?
I do the opposite of what you'd think. I thought, well, either this machine is a piece of shit, pardon my French, because I live over in Chelsea now, so I'm allowed to speak this way. Chelsea's in Quebec.
Yeah.
I just kept going, nah, this machine's fine. I know how physics work. You're not getting crushed into your shoulder pads by anything. You're letting the machine crush you instead of pushing back with your legs. So what I do now, and I try to tell anybody who has to do a squat that has no seat, I put the person in extra close with heavy weight and I crush them for 15, 20 seconds. And I say, listen, it's going to be 10, 15 seconds most. If you can sustain it, let's count to 20. And they expect to be crushed. So instead of going in and expecting it to just be a leg press with a heavy weight on it and their legs get tired over time, they expect to get crushed. And I crush them for 20 seconds, like doing a stretch. You hold the stretch. It's the same reflexive thing in your brain. It takes about 20 seconds for the message to get back and forth. I'm guessing, I could be completely wrong, but it looks that way to me. Then I lighten the weight and I back their seat off.
Right.
So when they start the set where their shoulders are crushed, their shoulders aren't nearly as squished as they were in that first 20 seconds, and their brain eases off a bit. Their brain stops panicking, because I find it's like when somebody's losing their balance, they make it 10 times worse by trying to balance. They overreact, and it's the same thing getting crushed in the machine. And that's an example to me of all signs pointed towards it not being a good machine to use. And I just became counterintuitive about it. Now, if I write what I just said to you and put it on a piece of paper, and you've used a duo squat machine and you think it's a piece of crap, you read what I said on the paper and you go, Andrew's out of his mind. I don't know what kind of head games he's playing there as a personal trainer, but he doesn't know what he's talking about.
So actually, I mean, I use it. So yesterday, the day before, I did. So sometimes I use it alternatively, and then I back the seat up, and I have stoppers. But when I use both legs together, because sometimes I use both legs together, then I actually, and remember with the dual leg press, I don't know if you've ever been on a dual leg press as opposed to dual. What feels like it's being crushed if you do it is your pelvis instead of your shoulders. So whether that's better or not, I don't know. But when I do both legs, I get as close as I can and I push it out to the very end. But like I did it the other day, I'm only using 190 pounds and I'm using a super slow cadence on it. And at the end, I'm so close that the machine itself stops me. I can't lock up my knees. But within 5 or 6, I think I did 6 super slow reps. So a 2-minute set, I'm done. I'm failed. And it's not because the weight is so light. So the beginning of the rep, particularly for the first couple reps, the beginning of the rep feels really light because it's a reverse cam, right?
Yep.
And the end feels hard, but not that hard because it's only 190 pounds, right? So I never get that. I get a bit of a crushing feeling, but nothing that can't be endured. Whereas if I try to do that with the seat a little further back, but with a heavy weight, 200-300 pounds, then I'll feel like my pelvis is literally being crushed into the seat, which, I might try that once in a while because it's my pelvis, but I won't do that with clients.
They put the seat on those. They put the seat on those, Richard, because they weren't selling.
Yeah, well,
Bill, too complicated to set up.
I spoke to Bill Casto. You know that name, right? So Bill is the one who designed that seat. And he really likes that machine. And then later on, I remember asking Ellington Darden, what happened to the duo squat? What happened to the duo leg press? Because Ellington talks about it as one of the best leg presses ever made.
Yeah.
But then he says, so why didn't they not continue with MedX? Why didn't MedX come up with something? And of course, MedX later went to, their regular one, or the one that I never tried, but people rave about is the MedX Avenger leg press.
Plate loaded.
Which was plate loaded, but at the end of the day, this is you and I, a couple of exercise geeks talking about a specific machine. At the end of the day, as long as you've got a major hip flexion exercise that you're doing regularly without hurting yourself, people would say, there's certain machines probably that people should stay away from, but if it's reasonably well designed and you do it regularly, you're going to do fine. I've got to get ready for my next client. Parting words. What would you like to leave your audience or my audience? Because obviously, I hope anyways, you'll share this with people that follow you on social media. What's a parting message that you would leave folks with?
Way above anything I could say about fitness or exercise is if you're going to make the move, you want to live a life where you're going to use exercise medicinally, you're going to have it be a part of your life, you got to marry it. It's about commitment. You could think about it as sustainable, or you could think about it as a financial thing, but I think the easiest way for the everyday person to look at exercise is it's a relationship. It's a relationship with yourself, just like brushing your teeth, taking care of yourself in any way, shape, or form. No one says you have to do it. You can let your teeth rot out of your head. You can die of a heart attack in your 60s. You can do whatever you want. It's just a relationship with you. If you've decided in your relationship with you to use exercise medicinally, you've got to marry it. You're not dating. You could date a few different people. You can go to a few different gyms. You can go try a bunch of different modalities. Avoid the crazy. You don't want to get hurt because then you won't be able to date at all. But think of it like a marriage. What exercise can you marry till death do you part? It's the easiest way to explain it in my book.
Yeah. So before you make that commitment, make sure it's a commitment you can actually stick to. It's interesting. I'll close with, I like the teeth brushing analogy. And if you brush your teeth twice a day, 7 days a week, that's probably shouldn't be taking a whole lot. Your exercise program probably shouldn't be taking a whole lot longer than what you take to brush your teeth. If it is significantly, then probably won't work. Andrew, it's been an absolute pleasure. We have to get together in person at some point. I'd love to have you come and visit my facility here sometime. And
I want to see all the updates.
Yeah, there's updates.
I hear you're quite the big shot now.
I got a MedX lumbar now.
Wow.
And I got the gluteator. I've got a couple that you have. I noticed on some, you've got one of those super forearms ones, which is kind of cool. And then a rotary shoulder one. Those are, do you have a rotary shoulder as well?
You mean the reverse pullover?
No, I mean, it's a rotary shoulder. You put your arm in a cradle And you were
Oh
like,
no, I'd love one of those. The shoulder, the rotator cuff machine.
yeah, the rotator.
No,
cuff
I still
machine.
just use the old shoulder horn. We don't have any. Tierney got the last word on equipment buying, and we bought a big West Side barbell hip belt squat machine.
Yeah, you know what? I use the shoulder horn as well. Because for some people, the shoulder horn is because some people, particularly if they've had their range of motion, and sometimes I'll use it also statically.
Yes.
Or, you know what I mean? Just manual pressure. Anyways, it's been a great pleasure. Let's do this again.
Excellent.
Have
Thank
a good
you,
one.
Richard.
Okay, bye for now.
Take care.
You too.